redpill.tv, the code of change. I'm your host, Renzo Buya. This is episode 13 with Piers from England, and the topic of today is the boarding school syndrome. Piers helps men to get unlock about this, unblock about the traumas. And Paris Hilton made a documentary about this topic. It's very, very interesting. And if you are thinking to send your kids to a boarding school, you should think again. And maybe you are doing the same mistakes in your own house with your kids that can affect them. And Piers is a very, very interesting person. He was a great banker in London, and he leaves this world to start a journey, and now he helps men to live the traumas, and it's very, very interesting. Piers, welcome to the Red Pill. I would like you, if you can talk about your background and how did you decide to make this big change in your life. Welcome, Piers.
Thank you, Renzo. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. Please feel free to ask me any questions. Remind me of things. So, yeah, essentially, my background, what I do now is I am a coach and a therapist, and I work mainly with men, although I do work with women from time to time. And my work is mainly dealing with people's trauma. And I also work with relationships, because I often find people who have been in trauma struggle in relationships. And I'll come back to that later about boarding school syndrome, about how that relates to a struggle in relationships. So how did I begin on this journey? So essentially I went to boarding school from the age of 11 through till 17, so for 7 years. And essentially I made the choice to go to boarding school. So at age 10, I went off for an exam. You know, you'd go away for 2 or 3 days, you'd do an exam in the institution. It's a lot of fun, and I wasn't getting on at home. So my father was an alcoholic, and I didn't get on with him at all. I was fighting a lot. And he went to boarding school. My godfather went to boarding school. His son, my kind of family members all went to boarding school. And therefore, it was just the done thing. And this is kind of partly where the syndrome comes from, is that it's just an institutionalized thing that the British, and there's certainly more in England and in kind of the UK, that they send their children to the boarding school to get a good education. And while you get a good education physically, you might be good at sports, you might be mentally very bright. The problem is with boarding school, and this is part of boarding school syndrome, is the emotional aspect. You don't receive an education emotionally. And so essentially my journey, so I went to boarding school, so 11 through till 17, and I found I was good at sport, and I was bright, and I didn't receive a lot of bullying, but I became very shut down emotionally, and I became very cold, and I couldn't connect to my emotions. I wasn't able to cry even when friends died. I wasn't able to cry at my father's funeral. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. But I started to have a breakdown in my 20s, working in the city in London, working in banking and sales. And it was at that point that I started to unpick, maybe it's got something to do with boarding school. Within a day of me arriving at a retreat center looking for a bit of respite, time away, I came across 2 books from biographies or from ex pupils from my school, and in it they questioned their life there, that whether they'd enjoyed it. And I was like, really they didn't enjoy it. So I had that question, did I enjoy it? And as the days went by, I realized that not only did I not like it, but I hated it. And it's just totally forgotten about this. And so over the coming years, I started to unpick this. I read, I don't know if I've got the book here. I don't have it tip of my hands, but the Making of Them by Nick Duffel. I read that and I was like, oh my God, that's so me. I'm shut down emotionally. I'm find it difficult to have relationships with not only women, but friends. I'm kind of very cold. Workaholic tendencies, find it difficult to shut off. And I realized that as I read through these books, I'm like, oh wow, that's me. It's not just an issue that I have, it's like common to boarding school syndrome. And so that, so it's a reasonably long story, but I went and spent time in a Buddhist monastery, and I had a breakdown during that time, but I was working with some amazing therapists and Jungian analysts, and they helped me to unpick my boarding school stuff, start to do that. And I came out of the monastery 2005, 2006. I've been training different modalities, and now most of my work is with ex-boarders, and they come to me with similar problems, and they want to receive healing. I want to know kind of the journey that I've been on. So so that's my own journey. I mean, boarding school syndrome, I thought I'd read out just a little phrase from the book Boarding School Syndrome by Joy Chevron, who she came out with this book about 2 or 3 years ago. And she says in this, early rupture with home has a lasting influence on attachment patterns. When a child is brought up at home, the family adapts to accommodate it. Growing up involves a constant negotiation between parents and children. And I know you have children, and you know that you're negotiating with the children. I want to go out, no, and you find that balance. But an institution cannot rebuild itself around one child. Instead, the child must adapt to the system, combined with the sudden and repeated loss of parents, because to be honest, you lose them every time you go back to school, every 3 weeks or every 6 weeks. You lose parents, siblings, pets, toys. This causes the child to shut itself off from the need for intimacy. This can cause major problems in adulthood: depression, an inability to talk about or understand emotions, the urge to escape from or to destroy intimate relationships. These symptoms are mostly affect early boarders. Those who start when they are older are less likely to be harmed. So that kind of sums up what boarding school syndrome is about. So for me, I personally don't feel boarding school, I used to think it was a terrible thing for everybody. But I feel we go through 3 levels with boarding school syndrome. First one I went through, and I feel a lot of boarders go through, is denial. It was like, it's perfect, it was great for me. But then when I started to look, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to second stage, which is, aversion. It's like, oh my God, it was horrible. It can't be good for anyone. And then after a bit of time, I was like, nobody could thrive in boarding school. It's a terrible place. But after a bit of time, I realized that there were those who found boarding school to be okay. And certainly if you go to boarding school age 16, 17, 18, then it's, can be quite beneficial. You're away from home, you have your own space, and you have that internal grounding. You've had that love as a child. And when you get to that age, it's